The Saw series has more flashbacks than any other horror franchise, and with 10 movies to account for, it's hard to keep track of all the dirty cops and copycats. Luckily, we've assembled a handy timeline to help you navigate the many important events in the Saw universe. Just be warned, spoilers ahead for all 10 films.
Oh yes. There will be blood.
Considering that the Saw timeline contains a ton of interwoven plot threads that stretch even before the first chronological on-screen moment, it's easier to start things off by looking at what each of our core characters was up to before they were drawn into Jigsaw's games. Let's start with Detective Eric Matthews of the Metropolitan Police Department. Although Matthews is a father, a married man, and generally one of the less horrible members of the MPD, his early years in the Vice Division are rife with corruption and abuse of power. The detective frequently plants evidence to ensure his suspects are convicted. Among his early victims is Amanda Young, a woman living with a heroin addiction. His transgressions go unchecked by the department until he's promoted to the homicide squad, where his excessive use of force starts to catch others' attention. Overall, however, he manages to keep his head down just enough to skate by, at least for a while. While Detective Matthews quietly continues his crimes, another officer is fixed on working within the system to bring criminals to justice.
Lieutenant Rigg, our SWAT commander.
What's his problem?
Everyone around him keeps dying.
Officer Daniel Rigg's career is threatened early on during a case involving an abusive husband and father named Rex. Rex has so terrified his wife and daughter that Rigg is essentially powerless to put him away. So in a moment of anger, Rigg physically assaults Rex in front of multiple witnesses. Rex is represented by Art Blank, a ruthless and unscrupulous attorney who manages to get his abuse case dismissed entirely. He's unsuccessful in pressing charges against Rigg, however, thanks to the false testimony of Rigg's partner superior, Detective Mark Hoffman. Like Detective Matthews, Mark Hoffman is a homicide detective for the MPD, and even though plenty of his coworkers are bad cops, he's even worse. This is in large part due to the death of his sister Angelina, who was murdered by her abusive longtime boyfriend Seth Baxter. This tragedy seems to have fractured Hoffman's faith in humanity and systems of justice, as he descends deeper into corruption and brutality than either Matthews or Rigg. Hoffman is called one evening to rescue MPD officer Matt Gibson from a violent patient released from the recently shuttered Clear Dawn psychiatric facility. Hoffman murders the unnamed patient in front of Gibson, compelling the latter officer to finally report Hoffman to internal affairs.
Next time, you shoot first.
Even though Hoffman isn't punished, Gibson is brought in as an investigator. As Gibson begins targeting the officers in Hoffman's inner circle, the two become sworn enemies within the MPD. Outside of the MPD's nasty bullpen, Amanda Young is watching her life slip away. Detective Matthews is successful in his attempts to have her convicted of heroin possession, which results in her imprisonment as well as her financial and social ruin. It also makes her addiction problems even worse. Nevertheless, she serves her time and makes a choice to seek help once she's free. She finds it at the Homeward Bound Clinic, a drug rehabilitation facility that urges those in recovery to cherish life. Along with Paul Leahy, Michael Marks, and Cecil Adams, Amanda becomes a client of healthcare professional Jill Kramer. Jill Kramer is married to John Kramer, a highly skilled, successful, and philanthropically minded engineer and architect. Jill's work with the Homeward Bound Clinic is supported by John, as well as benefactors like William Easton of the Umbrella Health Insurance Corporation. John is also the founder of the Urban Renewal Company that aims to build subsidized houses for the poor. He does so with the help of Art Blank, who apparently finds time to do zoning work for John while getting murderers acquitted. Jill becomes pregnant with their son Gideon. Her due date is slated for 1995, the year of the pig in the Chinese zodiac. Overjoyed at the news, John builds his son what will be his first toy, a puppet named Billy. At the same time, Jill's patients at the Homeward Bound Clinic continue to struggle, especially Amanda, who leaves Jill's care. Desperate for a fix, she and Cecil Adams plan to rob the clinic for petty cash. Jill happens to be working when this occurs, and she's accidentally injured during the robbery. Even though she's rushed to the Angel of Mercy Hospital, a doctor confirms that the trauma Jill suffered to her abdomen caused a miscarriage. John is understandably having a bad time. In a state of severe depression over the loss of his and Jill's unborn child, he begins to neglect all aspects of his life, including his work, his partnership with Art, and Jill's clinic. Their marriage becomes so strained that he ends his relationship with Jill and moves out of their home.
You can't just walk away. You're their savior, John.
Get the out of here.
On his own, John begins to notice that his ailments are no longer limited to emotional and mental distress. He begins to feel fatigued, confused, and sore in ways he isn't used to. He returns to Angel of Mercy to undergo tests, where he gets an x-ray of his brain that reveals the presence of a tumor. Unfortunately, the results of this test are entrusted to medical examiner Logan Nelson, who accidentally mixes up John's results with those of another patient. John's doctor thus erroneously gives him a clean bill of health and sends him home, allowing the cancer in his brain to metastasize. John returns to Angel of Mercy sometime later with even worse symptoms. Dr. Lawrence Gordon is given the unenviable task of informing John that his tumor has become inoperable and effectively untreatable. Overwhelmed by his grief, loneliness, and loss of faith in the world, John drives his car off a cliff with the intent to end his life. He miraculously survives, and in the process, he experiences a great deal of shame for having taken his life for granted. This further inspires a twisted revelation about the human will to live that swiftly propels him into a madness that will define the rest of his life. This reborn John Kramer now wants to test just how much pain a human being can endure, how much they're willing to sacrifice in order to survive. He wants others to experience what he has. In other words, he wants to force those like him to truly cherish their lives. At the same time, however, this new mission is clearly underpinned by a bitterness with the world and a desire to enforce his own perverse idea of justice. Thus, his first target is none other than Cecil Adams, the man responsible for Jill's miscarriage. John abducts Cecil at a Chinese New Year's parade in 1995, where he finds and dons his first pig mask. Cecil is then strapped into the knife chair, a contraption, or simply a trap, of John's own making meant to test his survival instinct. Little does Cecil know, he's become the first person in history to play a game designed by the soon-to-be prolific serial killer Jigsaw. Cecil pushes his face into a wall of knives and survives the test, but dies after trying to attack John. John cuts a piece of skin out of Cecil in the shape of a puzzle piece, effectively giving birth to the Jigsaw killer persona. To John, this symbolizes that his victim was missing a piece of themselves, the human survival instinct, which he now values above all else. This sensational Jigsaw murder captures the attention of the media, forcing the Metropolitan Police Department to put their best man on the case, homicide detective David Tapp. Compared to the likes of Matthews, Hoffman, Rigg, and even Gibson to some degree, Tapp is the Superman of the MPD. Even so, Tapp isn't the first to get to the bottom of the Jigsaw case. That honor belongs to none other than Jill, who recognizes Cecil and various elements of the crime scene. Believing John to be involved, she confronts him, but chooses not to take her suspicions to the police.
Why do you have Cecil's picture? What have you done to him?
I taught him not to take life for granted.
Having fully excommunicated Jill and severed his last connection to his previous life, John devotes himself entirely to Jigsaw. He experiments with new kinds of traps, most notably building a coffin made entirely out of reinforced glass that a person could potentially survive in for an extended period of time. But the scale of Cecil's test was apparently not entirely satisfying for John. He needs his next game to be bigger. John absconds to Jill's family barn, where he builds larger and more complex traps capable of testing multiple people at once. Tragically, fortune hands him the perfect opportunity to use his new torture barn after his nephew is killed in a motorcycle accident. John thus devises the Murderers Game, so called because it consists entirely of people yet to be held responsible for deaths they've caused. It includes one of John's neighbors who killed her own baby, a man who caused a deadly car accident, a shoplifter who inadvertently caused her victim to die of an asthma attack, and the man who sold John's nephew a faulty motorcycle. All of them are killed during the ordeal.
I want to live. As do I, Ryan. As do we all. But things happen.
Logan Nelson is also meant to be tested as part of the group due to his screw-up with John's medical results, but John accidentally overdoses him with the sedative he used to subdue them. Instead of letting Logan get killed via a buzzsaw wall and having his game end unfairly, John steps in to save him. Logan becomes strangely devoted to John because of this and becomes the first disciple of Jigsaw. Together, they build a murderous piece of headgear called the Reverse Bear Trap. Though it seems like Logan and John are a perfect match, another more audacious soul would soon unseat him. As devoted to Jigsaw as Logan is, his service is short-lived. It's possible John struggles to fully trust a man he nearly killed over a deadly clerical error, or perhaps John feels that Logan lacks the conviction necessary to truly be a part of his world. Once again alone, John is shocked to hear that Jigsaw has apparently killed a man named Seth Baxter, the abusive boyfriend of Detective Hoffman's sister Angelina. In reality, Hoffman himself has killed Seth, carved the puzzle piece out of his skin to match Jigsaw's MO, and took on the case himself to make sure it wound up going nowhere with the rest of the Jigsaw cases. It doesn't take John long to figure this out for himself. Hoffman is quickly kidnapped by John, who sees in him a man struggling with the lack of justice in the world just as he was. John offers him a choice: turn them both into the MPD as murderers, or join John as the next disciple of Jigsaw. Seeking revenge on the rest of the world, Hoffman chooses the latter and becomes John's apprentice.
Now you want a chance? You want a chance? I'll give you a chance.
John immediately puts Hoffman to the test by forcing him to help with Paul Leahy's game. Another one of Jill's former patients, Paul is tested for attempting to end his own life like John once did. He's forced to traverse a maze made of razor wire, but is ultimately unsuccessful and dies from blood loss. Despite Paul's failure, it's a success as far as Hoffman's initiation is concerned. Having a detective on his side also provides advantages John may not have been expecting, like Hoffman being able to alert John that his colleague David Tapp has been able to make significant headway since being put in charge of the Jigsaw case. John decides he needs needs more time to finish his work, so he gives Hoffman a pen he had taken from Dr. Gordon's office at Angel of Mercy and instructs him to use it to derail the investigation. Suffice it to say, John and Hoffman are getting on like a house on fire. Speaking of houses on fire, around this time, a real estate agent named Britt Stevenson gets a wacky idea. What if, hypothetically, she could get a good deal on a plot of urban land by, say, burning down the abandoned apartment building that currently sits on it? The idea is so interesting to her that she pays a drug dealer to set fire to the complex, only for him to then outsource the job to his customer Malik in exchange for an ounce of heroin. Unfortunately, the apartment building is not entirely abandoned. 8 squatters are killed in the blaze. Panicked, Malik turns to his wealthy father, who pays off the right people to make the incident go away. Meanwhile, Britt doesn't waste any time bribing a city planner to make sure that a real estate firm gets the business of building on the newly vacated lot. FBI agents Peter Strom and Lindsay Perez are brought in to investigate the clear-cut case of arson, and they even get a solid lead in the form of Britt's initial drug-dealing contact. When they're unable to track him down, the case dries up and the agents head home to Quantico. These crimes go unpunished, for now. John and Detective Hoffman continue the work of Jigsaw, though they aren't yet ready to repeat a test on the scale of the Murderers Game. Instead, they continue to abduct individuals that match John's flexible code. Anyone they decide is taking their life for granted, from adulterers and people with depression to escaped murderers, is fair game. The next victim together is Mark Wilson, a man who conned his friends and family by claiming to be suffering from an incurable disease. As someone who's actually suffering from an incurable disease, John considers him an ideal player. Wilson is drugged and forced to walk through broken glass to find the combination to a safe, but he accidentally sets himself on fire. Hoffman, watching from the sidelines, plants Dr. Gordon's pen on the scene for investigators to discover later. Perhaps due to its more personal nature, John embarks on his next game alone. He has 2 targets, both of them former patients at Homeward Bound, recovering addict Donnie Greco and Amanda Young, the former accomplice of Cecil Adams who bears shared responsibility for Jill's miscarriage. It's only the drug addiction that causes them to be tested. It's up for debate whether or not John knew Amanda was with Cecil the night Jill miscarried. John kidnaps the pair, then unearths the reverse bear trap he built with Logan Nelson. He straps it onto Amanda and gives her a choice: allow the trap to spring or cut open Donnie, inside of whom John has hidden a key to the headgear.
You better hurry up. Live or die. Make your choice.
Amanda is told that Donnie is dead, but he's merely been drugged with a sedative. Nevertheless, she retrieves the key, becoming the first person to live to tell their Jigsaw story. Not long afterward, John follows Amanda to her home and makes her a surprising offer. Revealing himself as her former captor, he invites her to join his project as a disciple of Jigsaw. Amanda actually agrees that the game helped her realize how much she had been taking her life for granted and decides to devote herself to John. As all this is going on, Dr. Gordon has no reason to suspect that the tragic old man seeing him for cancer treatment has anything to do with the horrific murders popping up in the papers. The married father is too busy carrying out a tawdry office affair to concern himself with such extraordinary notions, much less the possibility that he would ever be linked to these crimes. Nevertheless, with Hoffman's pen gambit having caught the attention of Detective Tapp, Gordon is unexpectedly approached by the MPD and brought in for questioning. When Gordon is made to watch Amanda's post-trap interview, he watches with unsettling fascination as she professes that the brutal ordeal was indeed to her benefit.
He helped me.
Unfortunately for Tapp, this interrogation doesn't seem to go anywhere, especially since Gordon has a solid alibi for the murder of Mark Wilson in the form of a rendezvous with his mistress. Officially, Tapp has to direct his attention elsewhere, so he goes with his partner to investigate a newly uncovered trap location. There, he nearly apprehends Jigsaw but fails to physically overpower him and suffers a nasty knife-to-throat injury in the process. His partner is even less lucky, falling victim to one of Jigsaw's booby traps and dying in a hail of gunfire. This encounter traumatizes Tapp, leading to instances of erratic behavior that earn him the rare honor of getting fired from the MPD for police misconduct. Obsessed with bringing Jigsaw to justice and unable to square how one of Dr. Gordon's pens would find its way into a Jigsaw crime scene, he hires photographer Adam Stanheidt to surveil Gordon's apartment. Meanwhile, the real Jigsaw is starting to see his next great game form in the margins of Tapp's crumbling case, as well as the hallways of the Angel of Mercy Hospital. His first target is hospital orderly Zep Hindle, who, unlike most, if not all of the rest of Jigsaw's victims, doesn't have a clear reason for being tested outside of having the misfortune of catching John's interest. John and Zep's interactions at Angel of Mercy are seemingly positive, especially compared to how dismissively Dr. Gordon regards his dying patient. In any case, Zep is captured by Jigsaw and poisoned. His game is to sneak into the Gordon household after after the good doctor steals away to meet with his mistress. He is then to hold his wife and daughter hostage during the entirety of Dr. Gordon's own forthcoming game. Should Gordon fail in his own game, Zep must kill Gordon's family, after which he will be rewarded by receiving the antidote to the poison, slowly killing him. The one wrinkle in Jigsaw's plan is Adam, the photographer Detective Tapp hired to watch Gordon's home. So naturally, Jigsaw does the mental gymnastics necessary to fold Adam into Gordon's test as well. Finally, we arrive at Jigsaw's most famous game of all. After Dr. Gordon leaves his home to meet with his mistress, leaving Zep open to start his own game, he actually chooses to end the affair, too little too late, as Gordon is kidnapped by John. Meanwhile, Adam, who had conveniently followed Gordon to his meetup and missed the start of Zep's game, is kidnapped by Amanda. Both men are dragged to a remote bathroom, where an elaborate game is set up for both of them. Seemingly developing a more passionate affinity for grotesque theatrics as the days go on, John elects to cast himself in their game as well, playing the role of a corpse. Gordon's game is to kill Adam in a set amount of time to save his family, an idea that becomes more enticing once he learns that Adam has been spying on him.
Face it, Larry, we're both bullshitters. My camera doesn't know how to lie. It only shows you what's put right in front of it.
Though Gordon initially refuses, a phone call from Zep, filled with the sounds of gunfire, convinces him to free himself from captivity by sawing off his own foot so he can finally leave. In reality, the gunfire is the sound of Mrs. Gordon fighting back, and then it's Tapp rushing in to rescue the family from Zep. After a pursuit between the two, Zep manages to shoot and kill the former detective. Zep flees to the side of Gordon's test to execute him at the behest of Jigsaw, but he ends up getting killed by Adam, who in turn is just barely clinging to life after getting shot by Gordon. Gordon, in similarly horrific shape and bleeding out from the ankle, crawls his way out from the bathroom in search of an escape. With the test having come to a chaotic and unexpected end, the disappointed John pulls himself up from the floor in front of Adam, much to his victim's horror and surprise. After revealing that Adam could have saved himself if he somehow saw the key in the bathtub nearby before it drained, a presumably annoyed John skulks out of the room and slams the door shut, leaving Adam to suffer in chains from his apparently non-fatal gunshot wound.
Game over.
On the other side of the door, John discovers Gordon alive, fighting to survive, but unavoidably succumbing to his wounds. Perhaps due to the unplanned nature of the game and his proven determination to survive, John decides to save Gordon's life. As Gordon recovers in John's care, he also decides to join the Jigsaw Project rather than turn John in. The mere thought of Adam's fate torments Amanda, as he was the first of her victims as a disciple of Jigsaw. To bring herself peace, she goes to the test site without John's knowledge, but instead of rescuing him or offering him a spot on the roster, she brutally murders him to put him out of his misery. With another high-profile case and two survivors in Amanda and Dr. Gordon, the Jigsaw brand is starting to receive wider attention. When a non-convert named Joan survives a trap and starts to tell her story to the public, it inspires struggling writer Bobby Dagen to see what kind of money and clout he can farm by claiming to be a Jigsaw survivor himself. He publishes a memoir titled Survive, detailing the ordeal he supposedly made it through, and uses it to launch a career as a motivational speaker.
We should never be ashamed of what we've gone through, because we are good, and we are strong.
Meanwhile, the actual Jigsaw survivors are too busy dealing with their own issues to worry about this pretender. Based on her experience with Adam, it appears Amanda is having some difficulty with the reality of the life she chose. Similarly, Dr. Gordon no longer wishes to return to the definitively cursed Angel of Mercy Hospital and departs in search of new employment. Finally, Detective Hoffman's feud with Gibson and internal affairs reaches its peak as the department starts to investigate his colleague, Detective Matthews. Only John takes notice of Bobby's book, throwing on a hoodie and backwards cap to meet him face-to-face at a book signing. Still, he's forced to divert his attention elsewhere when an unexpected chance to return to his old life emerges out of the blue. As Bobby Dagen is achieving a hollow version of self-fulfillment through Jigsaw, John Kramer finds himself in a similar predicament. Killing all these people has seemingly failed to bring about the profound peace he sought initially. That's why he's so excited to learn of the Pederson Project, a group of scientists who claim to have developed an experimental therapy capable of curing cancer. John feels a renewed sense of hope that Jigsaw might not be the only answer to his despair. He pleads with his old friend William Easton of Umbrella Health to approve his claim for the treatment, but William denies John personally on the grounds of the treatment's extraordinary claims. Whether or not this is true, William and Umbrella have a track record of ruthlessly denying claims, and they're being sued by the family of a man who died because they refused to cover his heart disease treatments.
You think it's the living that will have ultimate judgment over you, because the dead will have no claim over your soul.
John is still determined to survive, clinging to the Pederson Project as his last hope. He decides to pay for the treatment out of pocket and finances a trip to their laboratory in Mexico on his own. For a brief time, after he undergoes his treatment, he genuinely feels as though this nightmare has come to an end, and perhaps Jigsaw can as well. But when he returns to the lab and finds it abandoned, he realizes that he's been had. The Pederson Project was a total scam executed by sophisticated con artists, so naturally, John sets out to execute them. With the help of Amanda and Detective Hoffman, John manages to have almost everyone involved with the scheme kidnapped and brought to an abandoned facility where his next grand game takes place. They prove to be surprisingly resilient and conniving antagonists to Jigsaw, but are ultimately unsuccessful. At a later date, Hoffman personally helps John test Henry Kessler, the con man who referred him to the Pederson Project in the first place.
Out of all the men to cheat, you picked John Kramer? I call that epic bad luck.
While his thirst for vengeance has been satiated, John is now more certain than ever of his impending death. In a state of renewed clarity, he thinks of all the people who deserve to be tested by Jigsaw. In addition to the pretender Bobby Dagen and a host of others, John now has his eye on William Easton. He has also somehow put together Britt Stevenson's arson murder real estate scheme, right down to making a list of her accomplices. John wants all of them to pay, but he now understands that he probably won't live long enough to see his work through. He thus begins to set his affairs in order with his new lawyer, which includes pre-planning all games for all of his planned victims to be carried out by his disciples. It also includes recording final messages for Hoffman, Amanda, Dr. Gordon, and Jill, and curiously, leaving behind an upgraded reverse bear trap for an important final test. These items are all placed in a black box for Jill. Although Detective Hoffman loathes internal affairs, John's new swath of targets ironically forces him to serve justice to one of their targets, his colleague Detective Eric Matthews. Perhaps due to Amanda's involvement in the Jigsaw Project, John becomes aware that Matthews had been using planted evidence to put her and several others behind bars. John instructs Hoffman to use his police connections to retrieve this evidence, then has all of Matthews' victims kidnapped along with Matthews' son Daniel. Amanda also enters the game as a double agent. They are forced to compete for survival in a house set to become overwhelmed by a deadly nerve gas when the allotted time expires. Amanda and Daniel manage to survive, and Amanda keeps him held captive in a safe at Jigsaw's behest. John draws Matthews out with another game, where he at long last allows himself to be captured but reveals that he has Daniel hostage. John plays a recording of the nerve gas house game that fools Matthews and the rest of the MPD into thinking the game is being broadcast to them live, but Daniel is kept alive just feet away from them this whole time.
Tell me where he is.
He's in a safe place.
The MPD works to find the house in vain, with John successfully convincing a vulnerable Detective Matthews to discreetly take them both away from the police and into the bathroom site of Dr. Gordon's test. There he is ambushed by and trapped within by Amanda, who then rescues John and rushes to a secure location. Though he managed to have Detective Matthews captured for his crime, John's latest grand test cost him dearly. In addition to being beaten half to death by Matthews, he allowed his identity to be uncovered and revealed to the public. If that all weren't enough, his cancer is also rapidly accelerating. With time running out, he begins to execute the final game of his lifetime. One of the first targets of John's last grand game is none other than his old friend and former attorney Art Blank, at this time serving as counsel for his ex-wife Jill in the aftermath of the revelations about John's double life. He's abducted by John's disciples and essentially forced to be Jigsaw's errand boy as John calls the shots from his hospital bed. Detective Hoffman and Amanda become increasingly bitter with one another as Amanda's sanity slips and Hoffman begins to look for a safe-ish exit from the crumbling enterprise.
I'm not going anywhere.
You sure about that?
They kidnap Detective Allison Carey, one of Hoffman's colleagues, and put her in a trap that threatens to rip her ribcage apart unless she sticks her hand in a beaker of acid to retrieve a key. She does so in time, but finds that undoing the lock on her chest doesn't actually free her at all. As it turns out, Amanda has secretly begun to go rogue, rigging her games to be unwinnable. The next target of Jigsaw's final game is Jeff Denlon, a normal man whose life was destroyed after his son was killed by a drunk driver. The purpose of this game is to test if Jeff can move beyond his grief and anger at the world to live a better life. If he can, he'll be able to save his wife and daughter. Jeff seemingly was targeted in part by Dr. Gordon, who posited that his old Angel of Mercy colleague and fellow adulterer Dr. Lynn Denlon, Jeff's wife, should be on their list of Jigsaw targets. Given both of their records, it's understandable to question if he and Dr. Denlon were involved, but there's no hard evidence to suggest anything happened. In reality, Gordon may have suggested John abduct Lynn as part of a test, so the alien serial killer would have a decent doctor on call as he saw his final game through to completion.
Death is a surprise party. Unless, of course, you're already dead on the inside.
At John's command, Lynn is brought to him by Amanda and forced to wear a collar lined with shotgun shells. If John dies before the end of Jeff's game, the collar will activate and kill her. While Jeff and Lynn's game is underway, Art, who's working under duress for John, prepares the test for the second-to-last piece of Jigsaw's final game, Sergeant Daniel Rigg. It was only a matter of time before the least criminal member of the MPD found himself in Jigsaw's crosshairs. This game appears to be largely driven by Detective Hoffman, who's perhaps beginning to grow concerned that John's demise, along with the subsequent unraveling of the entire Jigsaw case, will eventually lead him to be discovered. Rigg's test is designed to force him to confront his pathological desire to be a hero as he attempts to rescue a barely alive Detective Matthews and an Oscar-worthy Detective Hoffman pretending to be held captive as well.
Heed my warning, Officer Rigg. Their lives hang in the balance of your obsession.
Hoffman has already set about incriminating Rigg in previous Jigsaw crimes. When he and Amanda took Detective Carey, Hoffman left a bullet at the scene with Rigg's fingerprints on it. He then anonymously calls in Agents Strom and Perez of the FBI to investigate, hoping to point them in Rigg's direction. Sergeant Rigg and Jeff fight through their respective games, leaving gallons of blood in their wake. At the end of Rigg's test waits Detective Matthews, Detective Hoffman, and Art Blank. Unbeknownst to Rigg, all of them will survive if Rigg chooses to free himself of his obsession by not saving them at all. At the end of Jeff's test waits John's operating room, where the killer is being cared for by Amanda and his wife Lynn. Unfortunately for the former test group, Rigg enters the room too soon. Matthews tries to stop him by shooting him in the gut, but Rigg still triggers the ice block trap that crushes Matthews' head and kills him. Before Art can explain the nature of the test, Rigg shoots and kills him too. Hoffman, emerging victorious, leaves Rigg to bleed out in the test chamber. Believe it or not, he still has one more trick up his sleeve. Meanwhile, with Jeff nearing the end of his test, John tells Lynn that she's free to go, but Amanda refuses to undo the lock on her collar.
Amanda, there are rules.
I said no! She doesn't deserve to go free.
Amanda shoots and kills Lynn instead, only for John to reveal that his final test was always ultimately meant for Amanda, and she failed. What John doesn't know is that Amanda only killed Lynn because she had found a note moments earlier left to her by Hoffman. Aware of Amanda's final test and wanting to clear her from the board, Hoffman threatened to reveal Amanda's involvement in Jill's miscarriage to John if she didn't kill Lynn. Jeff enters the room, sees the carnage, and kills Amanda. As his final test, John asks Jeff to forgive him, but Jeff cuts his throat with a circular saw, killing John Kramer once and for all. The death of John Kramer only means the birth of the new post-mortem era of Jigsaw. Jeff, having killed John and failed his test, is unable to complete the game and save his daughter. Agent Strom follows Hoffman's carefully laid trail to this very room and finds Jeff holding a gun and surrounded by dead bodies. Jeff assumes Strom is a Jigsaw accomplice and aims his weapon at him, forcing Strom to shoot him dead. A disguised Hoffman then captures Strom and places him in the water cube trap, a box fitted around the victim's neck that slowly fills with water and drowns the wearer. Even though it's meant more for execution rather than testing purposes, Strom still manages to survive by giving himself a crude tracheotomy. Hoffman is hailed as a hero by the MPD and gets promoted to lieutenant. His ultimate victory is short-lived, however, as he not only learns of Strom's survival, but of a final Jigsaw tape discovered in John's corpse. On it, John promises that his work will continue and names Hoffman as one of his targets.
You think it's over just because I'm dead? It's not over. The games have just begun.
Not long after, a note is left on Hoffman's desk that reads, "I know who you are," which he believes to have been written by Strom. In reality, it was written by Dr. Gordon, whom Hoffman is seemingly unaware is one of John's disciples. Around the same time, Jill meets with John's lawyer and is given a black box full of items left behind by him. With Jigsaw's impending test and an ongoing FBI investigation looming over his head, the newly promoted Lieutenant Hoffman plays it cool and executes one of the games John planned prior to his death, the Arsonists Game, meant to punish everyone involved with Britt Stevenson's arson scheme. This serves a secondary purpose for Hoffman as well, as it provides a perfect opportunity for him to once again steer investigators toward a different target, Agent Strom, who just so happens to have been a part of the arson investigation years prior. The obsessive Strom has conveniently been removed from the Jigsaw case by his superior Dan Erickson, despite his sound suspicions that Hoffman is somehow involved. Strom defies Erickson's orders and continues tailing Hoffman. Not that Erickson notices, seeing as he's too busy faking Agent Perez's death for whatever reason. Regardless, Strom's investigation eventually leads him to a room containing John's original glass coffin hidden underneath the nerve gas house.
Agent Strom, have you learned to trust me?
The only way to survive this room is by entering the glass box before you.
The two get into one final fight, and suspicious of the trap, Strom forces Hoffman inside it. That activates the mechanism, lowering the coffin safely into the floor and protecting Hoffman as the walls of the room come together to crush Strom to death. Erickson discovers the aftermath of the Arsonists Game, which Britt and Malik both survived. Finding evidence leading back to Strom at the scene, planted by Hoffman of course, he tells his agents to bring Strom in. Hoffman, believing himself to have finally found the proper scapegoat for Jigsaw, continues to set up games and incriminate Strom, largely thanks to the severed hand he took off his corpse. However, as he's preparing for the next grand game, meant for healthcare exec William Easton, several major problems arise at once. First, Agent Perez is revealed to be still alive, and unconvinced that Strom was a killer. Secondly, inconsistencies at recent Jigsaw crime scenes start to betray connections to the murder of Seth Baxter, with the FBI now reopening the case to scrutinize the validity of its connection to the Jigsaw murders. Finally, Jill Tuck is now in possession of evidence that could link Hoffman directly to John's crimes in the form of the black box. As the FBI agents continue their investigation, Hoffman scares Jill into giving him most of the contents of the box and rushes the completion of the William Easton game. A series of tests meant to punish the employees of Umbrella Health for killing patients like John by denying claims. William and most of his employees failed to make it out alive. Jill, meanwhile, secretly withheld the tapes recorded for Amanda and Dr. Gordon, delivering the former to a journalist and the latter to its rightful owner. When Erickson and Perez do manage to uncover the true murderer of Seth Baxter, Hoffman kills them both and uses the severed hand to frame Strom. With the 3 FBI agents dead, the final loose end for Lieutenant Hoffman to tie up is Jill Tuck. Jill draws Hoffman back to the site of William's test, and while distracting him by presenting the blackmail letter Hoffman wrote to Amanda, she incapacitates him with a taser. When Hoffman awakens, she strapped him into a chair and fixed a new and improved reverse bear trap to his head, but this time with no key.
This is John's will.
This final game, designed by John, is seemingly meant to undermine Hoffman's assumption that Jigsaw's death will leave him untested. At the same time, it's strange that Hoffman's game seems unwinnable, as that runs counter to Jigsaw's core principles. A possible explanation is that Hoffman wasn't meant to be tested by the bear trap specifically, but Jill chose to do so to get him out of the picture. As Jill flees, Hoffman overcomes his trap through brute force, using window bars as a means of stopping the fly trap from fully opening. While Hoffman is recovering from having his face half de-jawed by the reverse bear trap, one of Jigsaw's disciples finally prepares what seems to be the last game John pre-planned before his death. Without further ado, Jigsaw gets his posthumous revenge on the pretender Bobby Dagen for writing and profiting off a false account of his own Jigsaw survival story. There is some debate about who prepares and runs this game. It's assumed to be Hoffman, operating the games as a distraction for the MPD while perhaps selecting the Clear Dawn facility as the venue to taunt his old nemesis Matt Gibson. At the same time, that doesn't totally square with his recovery, nor his single-minded determination to silence Jill and thwart the MPD. It might make more sense that this game is carried out by Dr. Gordon, who actually appears at a Jigsaw support group to taunt Bobby and hear his story, with help from at least 2 disciples that viewers never learn the identities of. Bobby fails his test spectacularly, unable to save any of his friends and loved ones before being thrown into a recreation of the trial he made up for his book. Nevertheless, Bobby is still alive at the end of his game, his fate afterward left to the imagination for now. At the same time that Bobby's game is going on, Jill finally goes to the police with everything she knows about John Kramer, Jigsaw, and Detective Mark Hoffman. And who else is there to receive this story but the golden boy of internal affairs, Matt Gibson. Gibson promises Jill immunity for her involvement with the Jigsaw murders, and he promises to protect her from Hoffman as bodies from Bobby's game begin to pile up.
Do we have a deal?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we have a deal.
Eventually, Hoffman contacts Gibson and claims that he can call off Bobby's game if Gibson turns Jill in. Gibson refuses, and he's instead drawn into a game of cat-and-mouse manipulation with Hoffman that ends with Hoffman luring Gibson away from Jill and killing him remotely with a sentry gun. That gives Hoffman the opportunity to tear through the MPD's skeleton crew one by one to get to Jill. Hoffman takes Jill to a secure location and finally kills her using Logan Nelson's original reverse bear trap. Once again, however, Hoffman's victory is short-lived as he's stalked and kidnapped by Jigsaw's final faithful disciple, Gordon. Gordon takes Hoffman to the site of Rebirth, the bathroom in Jigsaw's underground labyrinth. He leaves Hoffman to rot with the remains of his severed foot, ending his reign of terror.
Game over.
As revelations about Hoffman, the massacre of the MPD, Bobby's test, and Jill's death hit the airwaves, the horrific legend of Jigsaw presumably reaches its peak in terms of public awareness and terror. Logan, still working as a medical examiner at Angel of Mercy, makes money on the side selling Jigsaw memorabilia and trap schematics on the dark web. Some of them are purchased by his obsessed assistant, Eleanor. At the same time, many citizens are terrified that the games will somehow continue. To make matters worse, Detective Brad Halloran of the MPD is helping violent criminals escape jail, resulting in a string of murders. One of the victims happens to be Logan's wife. Having created enough public fear for the city to pass legislation that expands the powers of the Metropolitan Police Department, the MPD immediately ramps up their corruption and police brutality. All of this is covered up by MPD Police Chief Marcus Banks, whose son Ezekiel is also a member of the force. Unlike his father, Ezekiel Banks is a relatively upstanding officer for the MPD. His morality is put to the test when he witnesses his partner kill someone in cold blood to cover up for one of the many corrupt cops within their ranks. Impressively, Zeke walks right over the bar for honesty in this police force and reports his partner to Internal Affairs. Gibson would be proud. Zeke's upstanding nature leads to mixed results for his career at the MPD. On the one hand, he eventually earns a promotion to homicide detective. On the other hand, he's basically hung out to dry whenever he calls for backup and is nearly killed during a shootout.
My son called for backup 3 times in 8 minutes. Did none of you motherfuckers can get here?
Chief Banks tries to protect his son from the other cops as much as he can, but Zeke is once again on his own when his father retires. The murder of Logan Nelson's wife pulls him out of his detachment from the Jigsaw Project. When he discovers Detective Halloran is responsible for the freeing of several violent criminals, including his wife's murderer, he decides to recreate Jigsaw's first group test, the Murderer's Game. He rebuilds the individual traps in Jill's family barn, then kidnaps 3 of the criminals freed by Halloran and forces them to compete. None of them survive. Logan allows these bodies to be discovered publicly in order to bait Halloran into getting involved and revive Jigsaw as a threat to criminals. As Halloran falls right into this trap, Logan manipulates events and evidence to subtly build suspicion against Halloran as a Jigsaw copycat killer. By the time the MPD has discovered all of the corpses from the second Murderer's Game, Logan is able to lead Halloran to a reckless final standoff at the barn where, in front of Logan's faithful assistant, he gets to play heroic victim while Halloran is revealed as the brutal psychopath he is. As she runs off to get help for Logan, Jigsaw's heir masterfully abducts Halloran and brings him to a replica of John's lair. There, Logan tricks Halloran into confessing his crimes on tape by strapping laser cutters around his neck.
People died because of me! Innocent people died because of me! I did it!
Confessing doesn't save him after all, and Halloran gets one of the most infamous deaths in the series when his head is cut into slices by a laser. It's unknown if Logan continues acting as Jigsaw after this. It's possible he merely uses what little Jigsaw experience he had to ruin Halloran's reputation and clean up his mess, and now he has no reason to continue with a mission that he already abandoned once. Sometime after the Halloran debacle, the Metropolitan Police Department is terrorized by another Jigsaw copycat. This time, it isn't Halloran, Logan, nor any rightful heir of Jigsaw who managed to survive like Dr. Gordon. Instead, it's one of the MPD's own, homicide detective William Schenk, who not so coincidentally works under Zeke Banks. Schenk is the son of Charlie Emerson, the innocent man who was murdered by Zeke's partner years prior. His stated aim is to punish the corrupt cops within the MPD, including Zeke's father Marcus.
But you're different. You're Metro's finest. That's why I want to team up with you on this.
At the end of the game, Schenk offers Zeke the chance to join him to try and fix the broken system, but Zeke refuses. So Schenk forces him to play one last game, allow him to escape justice or let Marcus die in a trap that drains his blood. Even though Zeke chooses to save his dad, the SWAT team called to the scene shoots and kills Marcus when the trap forces him to point a gun at them. Given how long Schenk was planning his vengeance, it's potentially possible that he was somehow brought into the formal Jigsaw fold by Dr. Gordon. Maybe he was one of the yet unknown disciples who was with Gordon when he captured Mark Hoffman, but there's no evidence in the films thus far to suggest he's anything more than a lone copycat. If Gordon, Logan, or any other Jigsaw disciples are still out there, it isn't hard to imagine that they would want to meet Schenk for themselves very soon. That's where the timeline ends, with the MPD in disarray and a wannabe Jigsaw still out there. But unless we get confirmation that another film is definitely happening, that's game over on the Saw franchise.